Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on June 5th, 2022 Global Technopolitics Forum's research team. So I welcome everybody. And Greg, is there anything you would like to report?
I don't think so. We had a good conversation about Ukraine last time. I'm going to speak again about it later this week. Things march along, but if anybody has any new perspectives or new questions, that would be great.
I have one question. If anybody has any questions?
You go ahead, Pari, first, and then I have one which I'll sort of put to Greg. But you go first, please.
Yeah, I was reading an article, and there is this question of now planning for a Marshall Plan for digital Ukraine. And the question is how and in what shape and form that Marshall Plan for digital Ukraine should look. What should be the priorities? What issues should be emphasized, and how we should go about it? Anybody has any comment on that? What do you think would be most important aspect of that Marshall Plan for digital? Remember, we are talking about digital aspect of Ukraine.
It's a good question.
Any comment? Yes.
It's a really good question, I think, particularly since Ukraine is going to have so many physical needs as well. I mean, it's going to have to be rebuilt almost entirely, or at least big chunks of it. So I don't know exactly how the digital piece, whether the digital piece should get priority. Is that the idea, that there should be some special emphasis on the digital rebuilding?
I think one issue to consider was even before invasion, Ukraine was strong on digital front. So it's an easier part, it's cheaper part, it has a lot of resources already, and there's a global support for it. So in terms of, I think, low hanging fruit, it's a easy part of it. Also, it could provide an edge for them, especially as they start to rebuild a lot of infrastructure, a lot of government resources. I think it could help them by emphasizing digital part of the Marshall Plan. It could help them to have an edge in relation to everything else.
Does seem like low-hanging fruit, given their relatively competence already, and really how relatively well they've done throughout the war at keeping the digital world alive.
Yeah, they managed to amass about 500,000 digital army. That is hacktivists, which they try to help them by, hacking Russian websites, and also defending their own infrastructure and buildings. So they have been strong when it comes to digital front. Having said that, the digital aspect of war wasn't that visible in this war. And of course, we know why. The objective for Russia was invasion, and invasion means boots on the ground and, terror and that kind of approach. So any comments?
Pari, can I jump in with a comment about
Sure.
that? In the past, I've frequently hired Ukrainian software engineers.
I did.
And I've worked with them plenty of times for my political tech prediction company, and I still work with them. However, many have had to give up their jobs and go to the front, and this is something that I've heard from other people that also work in the AI space and machine learning space, that they've lost that pool of talent to the war. Now, just yesterday I was having a conversation with a software developer that works with Bloomberg, and he also had a lot of colleagues in Ukraine, because a lot of this work is outsourced to Eastern Europe, sometimes the subcontinent and elsewhere. So I was wondering if maybe this digital Marshall Plan could somehow provide support for those that perhaps prefer not to fight and would rather continue working on their careers as software engineers. Although I wouldn't know how that particularly would work. I imagine it'd have to be a tailored program for people that have those skills. But it was just just yesterday we were having this conversation how sad it was that we lost that pool of talent, because they're really good at it, and I think it's because they had good universities, good schools, and also as in terms of their approach to the work ethic in general. It's really sad that we can no longer fish into that pool of talent.
Yeah. And I think since 2014, purposefully they try to emphasize their digital, workforce, and they succeeded on it.
Yeah.
Any other comments in terms of? I mean, already I think prior to war, 20 or 30% of their economy was digital, digital aspect. So that's also shows that they're strong on that part. And yeah, that would be quite good to emphasize that. So any other comment in terms of what that digital Marshall Plan should look like, Paul?
Yeah, I would say, well, sort of following maybe on what Eduardo was saying, just in general education, because technology changes quickly. And, it seems to me that, having a good education infrastructure and base in place is important. And the other thing is redundancy. I mean, none of this works without networks, right? So at least where I come from, the most critical thing you can do if you want to have a network that functions under whatever circumstances, that redundancy is built in and that it's well thought through. So that would be the other thing I would consider. I mean, that sort of plays into, you can see the Ukrainians are asking Elon Musk to provide this Starlink satellite service. So that's maybe an example, but something like that would have been good to have thought about even before, a crisis like this. And so, yeah, to me, that's sort of, an important part of any, network and what all this stuff is built on would be, very good redundancy built into the plans that they've got.
Any other comment?
I mean, there's a fact, and we have talked about it, that Ukrainians are pretty good at coding, computing, software. And most of these Ukrainians are also employed by many tech companies in Taiwan. And they have lost out really badly because of the war which Russia is waging in Ukraine. And many of these young people in Ukraine are supposed to fight, given their internal provision of conscription and so on and so forth. What Paul is saying is absolutely correct, but I can say something. All this has already begun to play out. Many of the Western and European universities, when now they advertise either for a fellowship or for education, they're writing it very expressly that those from Ukraine will find priority. So that is already happening. So what will really probably serve the bigger purpose through any Marshall Plan of that kind would be that 12 million Ukrainians who are displaced, both internally and externally. What could be the kind of a plan for those who are out? They have migrated, they might settle, or they might live outside for a few years. What could be the kind of education, technical education for them? Maybe they are, educated wives, maybe children who are growing up. So I think if a Marshall Plan were to be thought through, and if we were to compare to the earlier Marshall Plan, which the US had, we really need to put a lot of focus and emphasis, not only within the US, but also with partners, who are sort of supporting US in, their support to Ukraine. So those in UK, those in Europe, those are coming to US, there has to be some kind of bilateral and multilateral kind of plan for educating these people and building their skills, and not really waiting for those people who have gone to fight the war in Ukraine. You never know what will happen. And if you really would have followed through what happened yesterday and today, Russians have now started bombarding Kyiv. And this is what we talked. There are only two ways in any military operation of this kind. One, that you weaken the surrounding or periphery and let the center part sort of sink in. Or you sort of destroy the central parts that the periphery can sink in. So now Russians are going to do that. And there won't be any compromise by Putin unless there is some kind of territorial concession being given to them. And that is pretty obvious now. And therefore I support, this idea for the notion of Marshall Plan, because we will really need to build their capacity, technical expertise, educating them, and mainstreaming them wherever they are going to be. So I think that part of the Marshall Plan could probably focus a little bit more on hand-holding, capacity building, supporting them, and not really see what happens to Ukrainians who have been deployed on the front line to defend their territory. You never know what will happen. So that's a piece from my side. Yeah.
Thank you. Greg, any comments?
Oh, that's interesting. Next month is going to be interesting.
Firuze?
I have one question. I know like the Russians are equally adept at in the digital realm as the Ukrainians are, and then they are using their digital prowess in order to disseminate kind of like fake news and disinformation. Are the Ukrainians returning the favor in kind? What is the extent of that digital warfare between these two?
Yeah, there is two interesting things happening in Russia. One is that infrastructure is degrading increasingly because a lot of people are leaving, meaning that a lot of companies leaving or cutting services to them. In other hand, their workforce is shrinking because a lot of tech-savvy experts are leaving the country. So far, we have a figure of around 20,000, but predicted 200,000 experts are leaving. So Russia is not in a very good position right now when it comes to digital realm. Their focus has been on information war rather than digital or internet. Mm-hmm. So they're focusing on content when Ukraine has been focusing and rest of the world on infrastructure and warfare rather than information war. Also, Ukraine hasn't been bad in terms of reaching the West, but Russia has done a fabulous job inside the country and in the countries that align with it in information war. I don't think it has done anything, has been able to change the narrative in Western world, but within their own orbit, they've done a very good job with information war. Greg, any comment on that?
No, I think you get it exactly right. I've been surprised at how relatively inactive Russia has been. You would have thought they would have tried harder to take down everything in Ukraine. Now, maybe they're the kinds of factors you talked about mean they don't have the capacity, as particularly in the human capacity. But it has been interesting to see that they haven't been just like, I guess, on the ground they haven't been as adept as we thought they would be, and even in the digital world they haven't been either. And so that's come as a bit of a surprise.
Another point I want to make is in terms of not being very active, I think there's also a strategy. There is a strategy there. If the objective is to gain to advance physical sort of boundaries, engaging in internet war, it may be unnecessary and reveal their capacities prior to the time that they want to use it. So I think there is some degree of strategic planning there as well, that they just don't want to show their capacity and holding to it for a more fruitful time. Any comments from anybody? So one question I was thinking about, that if Ukraine, we are thinking about the Marshall Plan, beyond the fact that, okay, education and capacity building, what role digital currencies could play there in these circumstances?
Just not sure.
Not sure. And also government should become completely digital. I think this is a good opportunity for them to turn the government infrastructure to complete digital infrastructure. It will be safer for future because they will be engaged in this war for a long time. And also it will be safer, cheaper, and easier and better maintained. Any comment?
You think the war will be like a long-term war? You think that this war is going to go on for a long time?
Maybe not in this shape. Maybe there will be some kind of agreement to stop it. But as we know, since 2014, they have been in a war.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe they didn't declare war, but they have been in a war. So even if there is an agreement, I think still they will be in defense, and Russia would look for opportunities to create new problems. And so maybe not official war, but they will be in a state of constant struggle. Any comments? Yeah,
it's hard to imagine any very near or clean end to this war, unfortunately. Henry Kissinger has been talking about some territorial concessions on the part of the Ukrainians. That seems like that'd have to be part of any deal, but it's not clear to me that Ukraine is there yet, prepared to think about that. And most of the outcomes you can imagine seem to me just a kind of a continued stalemate with some fighting off and on. That leaves still Russia as kind of a pariah, and Putin as a would-be war criminal, and also probably leaves the sanctions more or less in place, though we'll see some strain, some conflict. We've seen a little bit already in the coalition opposing Russia, but so far it's held together pretty well. So we'll see some strains there, but it's just hard to see any very clean end to this. What is a terrible mess and a human tragedy.
But what do you think prevents Ukraine from accepting and kind of reaching to some sort of agreement? Because it's clear that they cannot win this war.
Yeah, in some sense, I think all of the external help has probably encouraged them, right, to think that they might actually win, in some sense, the war. If that becomes less and less visible and less likely, maybe that'll begin to change their mind. But at this point, we sort of encouraged them to have maximalist aims of getting all of their territory back, maybe even including Crimea.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem likely to happen, but they're not quite there yet, at least as I see them.
I could comment, Farid. The following potentially play out, which means Crimea is gone. I mean, that's not really going to come back to Ukraine at all.
No, I don't think so either.
Now Russians are eyeing Donbass.
Mhm.
They have completely sort of been there. It is only a matter of declaring that they have arrived. And then what they will do is that they will cut off Ukraine from the Black Sea, from the southern side. And if that happens, and this is what is likely to happen, this is where Putin will find some kind of a, very complicated plan of peace and dialogue to put forward, but he will like to really use Donbass, cut Ukrainians from the south side to the Black Sea. And then if that happens, then Ukraine is going to be economically unviable. And what will also happen is the NATO, because once the Crimea is gone, Donbass is gone, and then what will happen is that NATO, if NATO does anything in the periphery, that will really come within the territorial position of Russians. And then they might really say that, look, if NATO is doing this, it really touches the boundary or territorial position of Russia within Donbass and Crimea. And that could probably trigger NATO, Russia kind of a thing, which both the parties have been trying to avoid. So I really fear that part, and if that really happens, and if Ukraine, after being cut off from the Black Sea, becomes economically, unsound or unviable, and then that also presents a pretty complicated kind of scenario to NATO, putting NATO and Russia together, and that might really trigger, a greater fallout. And so I foresee that kind of scenario, which may not be a very good scenario. This is what Russians are trying to do, and they will not stop anything sort of territorial concessions being given to them by Ukrainian, and let's see how it all plays out. That's my hunch. This is what I feel might really happen.
Yeah. Yeah. So is there anything else anyone likes to discuss today? No? Okay, in this case, I want to thank you, everybody. Next week, we won't have a meeting. I will be traveling, Greg will be traveling, so both of us actually flying on Sunday, so we won't have a meeting. Week after that, I'm not sure, so I will send you a note if I could manage to have a meeting. So otherwise, we may have a few weeks of delay in between, but yeah, next week for sure we won't have a meeting. So I want to thank you, everyone, and wish you a wonderful week ahead, and talk to you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.